Various national leaders have been announcing that they will recognise the state of Palestine. President Trump has opinions about this. Actually, President Trump has remarkably changeable opinions about it. Almost as though it's not the principle of the issue that's driving his reaction, so much as to do with other issues closer to home, maybe? Well, let's discuss. As the onset of starvation amongst Palestinians in Gaza has become increasingly the focus for media coverage, various of the G7 nations have been taking the initiative. So specifically, France, the UK and Canada. They have all said that, sometimes subject to certain conditions, they will recognise the state of Palestine at the United Nations at its next meeting in September. Donald Trump met the news about France and the UK with sort of a shrug, followed by sort of some grumbling. But when Canada followed suit, well, he hit them with the threat that this would mean an end to their trade talks, which is a wildly different response. So let's just go through it. First out of the blocks was President Macron of France. He announced that France would be the first G7 nation to recognise the state of Palestine. Posting on Twitter, he said that in addition to that recognition, we must also guarantee the demilitarisation of Hamas and secure and rebuild Gaza. Finally, we must build the state of Palestine, ensure its viability, and ensure that by accepting its demilitarisation and fully recognising Israel, it contributes to the security of all in the Middle East. There is no alternative, he concluded. But of course, there's always an alternative. Right-wingers in Benjamin Netanyahu's party, and on certain days at least, the President of the United States, have developed a preference for the alternative where all Palestinians get booted out of Gaza and shipped to other countries, destination unimportant. So, needless to say, they were not leading the applause at this development. Netanyahu posted, also on Twitter, "We strongly condemn President Macron's decision to recognise a Palestinian state next to Tel Aviv in the wake of 7th of October massacre. A Palestinian state in these conditions would be a launch pad to annihilate Israel, not to live in peace beside it. Let's be clear, the Palestinians do not seek a state alongside Israel, they seek a state instead of Israel." Now, a year ago, there was widespread sympathy for that as an argument. Israel is now finding, in recent weeks at least, that the widespread reports and the visual evidence for the starvation in Gaza has rather made Israel look like the one that's seeking to wipe out the nation next to it. The United Nations has said that there is mounting evidence of famine and widespread starvation. Various people argue about the justness of that take, but they can argue all they like. Public sentiment has been shifting significantly as a result, and including in the United States, where only 32% of Americans now approve of Israel's military action in Gaza, down by 10 points from last September, and only 9% of people under the age of 35 years old. It's not just people on the left or centrists being influenced by the people on the left. The issue is even breaking the party divide more than it previously was in the US. Even Trump's MAGA base is splitting on it. Marjorie Taylor Greene, for instance, condemned the situation in Gaza, saying that it constituted genocide. And she attacked fellow Republican Randy Fine, who had tweeted telling Palestinians to starve away, before suggesting that all of it was, quote, Muslim terror propaganda anyway. The advantage of living in a universe fueled by conspiracy theories is that any story, regardless of how much evidence it may have to support it, can nevertheless be dismissed with a wave of the hand as being something. The mainstream media lies, or Muslim propaganda, or President Obama personally writing the Epstein files. Nothing is too crass, nothing too outlandish. President Trump was not impressed with Macron's initiative, saying this to the reporters at the White House: "What he says doesn't matter. He's a very good guy. I like him, but that statement doesn't carry weight. This was then followed by Keir Starmer for the UK. Starmer said that as a result of the increasingly intolerable situation on the ground in Gaza, the UK would recognise the state of Palestine at the UN unless Israel met certain conditions. Those conditions were that it should abide by a ceasefire, there should be no annexation of occupied territories in the West Bank, and it should commit to a two-state solution. Which is basically saying that UK is going to recognise Palestine because there must be next to zero chance of Israel agreeing to those conditions. Like Macron, Starmer also went out of his way to say that Hamas must release all remaining hostages, except they will play no role in the government of Gaza, and they should disarm. Nevertheless, Israel and some of Labour's domestic opponents were quick to say that the terror group would be the prime beneficiaries of this statement. Netanyahu posted on Twitter, Keir Starmer rewards Hamas's monstrous terrorism and punishes its victims. President Trump was again asked what he thought after Keir Starmer had made the announcement. I'm not going to take a position, he said. I don't mind him taking a position, which sounds remarkably live and let live of him. He was a bit more judgmental when talking with journalists on the flight home, saying, you're rewarding Hamas if you do that. I don't think they should be rewarded. It was still somewhat restrained, unlike the statement from the US State Department, which said it was, quote, a slap in the face to victims of Hamas's deadly 7th of October 2023 attack. And then Mark Carney said that Canada would join its fellow G7 nations, France and Britain, in recognising Palestine. Carney said that the support was conditional on the Palestinian Authority committing to certain changes, including holding elections from which Hamas would be excluded, which he said it had agreed to. That did not get a live and let live response from President Trump. Instead, he posted on social media that Canada's decision on Palestine would, quote, make it very hard for us to make a trade deal with them. Oh, Canada, he said. This is, well, obviously inconsistent. The US has not said it will tear up the trade deal with the UK because of its initiative, or indeed with Europe because of President Macron's actions. So why on earth would this be remotely relevant to the trade discussions with Canada? It's surely one of two possible answers. One, if Trump still regards Canada as the 51st state in waiting, so he's going to demand of it greater alignment with his own policies as a result. Or two, and I would lean towards this one personally, he already has decided that the trade talks with Canada are not working because it's insisting on negotiating for a fair deal, which of course is not the point of the exercise at all, as far as he's concerned. So he's grasping this as an excuse to do a big dramatic gesture, which is what he likes to do, and put those talks on the back burner for a while. It is also a test of Canada's strength. A couple of months ago, Carney was willing to shelve the digital services tax that Trump initially used as an excuse to walk away from talks. Trump is now looking to see if he can get Carney to backtrack on this Palestine commitment in the same way. After all, he would think, the citizens of Canada are not going to embrace 35% tariffs with all the hardship and suffering that will bring on behalf of the Palestinian people halfway across the world. Because why would they? He thinks not, but this will be the test. If Canada backs down, it will have shown its weakness. His trade team will disregard all the tough talk in the negotiations and just keep going for maximal concessions. If it doesn't, and if that does hold with the citizenry, well, we don't quite know how that will play out. In many ways, it's remarkable that it should be counted as such a big deal. Because look, here's the map of all the countries in the world that have already recognised the state of Palestine. It is a significant, even an overwhelming majority. Sure, the G7 countries were not previously amongst them. Nevertheless, all those countries had held for the last couple of years the at times excruciatingly uncomfortable position that, yes, the original Hamas attack had been so completely inhuman and beyond the pale that Israel had a right to strike back hard against this existential threat on its border. So for a group of them to all state at the same time that Israel has now gone so far beyond the moral mandate given to it by that terrible inciting incident that now it has to be called to account, it remains a statement of some significance. And it's rather prompted by the growing reality that the far-right members of Netanyahu's government were increasing the momentum for annexation, for the expulsion of Gazans and all the rest of it. Macron, Starmer and Carney probably decided you had to make your stand before that becomes reality. Because once it's happened, it becomes the new status quo. It's much harder to change back. Ultimately, Israel will only respond to initiatives from the United States, not from these other G7 countries, so the announcements have only symbolic force, powerfully so, but they won't change decision-making by Netanyahu. It's worth noting, by the way, that Canada wasn't the only one getting told by the Trump administration this week what they should and should not do with their country. Yesterday, Trump also escalated his attack against Brazil on the grounds that it's continuing to prosecute his buddy, former President Jair Bolsonaro. Trump signed off on the 50% tariff against many Brazilian goods, as he had previously threatened he would do, but he has also brought in sanctions targeting the Supreme Court judge overseeing the Bolsonaro case, Alexandre de Moraes. The measures being used under the Global Magnitsky Act previously were reserved for punishing individuals who have engaged in some of the most serious human rights abuses. Brazil's President Lula da Silva said, "I think it's important for President Trump to consider if he wants to have a political fight, then let's treat it as a political fight. If he wants to talk trade, let's sit down and discuss trade, but you can't mix everything together." Yeah, but of course he can. And he will. It wasn't that long ago that Trump was standing on a podium during his Gulf States tour telling his high-ranking audience that the United States was done with telling other countries how they should run themselves. He probably should have added, outside of the Americas and Europe. Plus South Africa specifically, for some reason. In Trump's own version of the Monroe Doctrine, he seems very much interested in telling countries what they can and can't do when it suits him. Since he came into office over 6 months ago, it is a fact that Trump has inserted himself into most of the ongoing major stories and conflicts around the world. It's why we talk about him all the time on this channel. The US is anything but isolationist. Now look, it may have stopped doing useful things for other countries, like feeding their starving children or helping them get access to medicines for epidemics, that sort of thing. But it will still threaten them if they look like coordinating with each other, trading with each other, selling weapons to each other, and sometimes just by taking their own positions on world geopolitical events if they don't happen to accord with Trump's own. What makes this recent development significant is that those G7 countries seem ready at last to move on from the process of flattering Trump and lobbying Trump to use his influence in the way that they believe might be helpful. They are noting America's position, but deciding to act according to their own principles regardless. Maybe it's a small step, but the first sign at least of a willingness to act directly without always needing the US to be on side. The issue they're focusing on is people dying of starvation, people queuing for food, being attacked and all the rest of it. It is a humanitarian crisis. For once, they are not prepared to indulge the idea that actually it's all about Donald Trump.